And we're getting a transcription too. So that is great. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us. I already shared with you, but I'm so grateful for your time today. You have always been a great help for me in my career. And so when I thought of who should join and who should be a part of a webinar, you definitely came to mind. And you have so much experience and knowledge in the professional world, especially as a female and as a woman. And so I know there's so much we can learn from you. So I'm going to go ahead and just share an introduction of Jess today.
Yeah.
Jessica is the Chief People Officer and board member at Logistics Specialty, Inc., where she leads people, operations, and talent strategy to align with business goals with to align business goals with employee success. With over a decade of experience in human resources, Jessica has built her career as a strategic leader across all areas of HR, including employee relations, recruiting, workforce planning, and organizational development. Prior to her role, she spent over 7 years at MarketStar, progressing through multiple HR leadership positions. Jessica is passionate about empowering others, fostering trust, and creating high-performing cultures where individuals and organizations can thrive, which just maybe that's a whole nother webinar we can do about culture and how to create and grow a strong culture. Yes, her work focuses on building strong partnerships, driving growth, and helping people navigate change with clarity and confidence. Through her leadership experience, Jessica has worked closely with individuals and teams navigating constant change, from organizational shifts to career transitions and evolving workplace expectations. She brings a practical and grounded perspective on how professionals can move through uncertainty, manage the emotional side of change, and build the self-trust needed to grow. Her approach blends strategic insight with real-world application, helping individuals not just adapt to change, but use it as a catalyst for meaningful career progression. So, Jess, thank you. We are so excited. This is going to be amazing.
Thank you. That was a really great intro. I love it. Thank you. I feel so great.
Well, you're welcome. Maybe we can kind of just kick off the conversation. So, from your experience, why is this topic of navigating change? The topic today is change, is leaning into change, the key to career growth and self-trust. So, why is that topic of navigating change so relevant in the workplace today?
Well, I think the topic of change is especially relevant right now because change isn't like an occasional thing anymore. It's really constant. And especially with a lot of, certainty that's happening in the world right now. I hear it a lot. I don't know if a lot of people are maybe not experiencing that, but whether it's like organizational shifts or maybe evolving leadership, there's always new technologies or changing expectations around how and where we work. So I think most people are navigating change, which comes with that sort of level of uncertainty at any given time. So what I wanted to kind of talk about it is because what I've seen in my career, particularly working closely with leaders and teams, times of transitions are really difficult. And that change I've seen can sometimes be sort of a defining factor in someone's growth. So it's not just about kind of what role you're in or how long you've been there, but really how you respond to change or when things shift around you can really define your progression. Because change can bring hesitation. So we tend to want clarity, we want stability, we want to feel fully prepared all the time to step into something new, especially women. We really want to feel like we are fully prepared. But the reality is that growth rarely comes from those fully defined, comfortable moments. It really comes from navigating the unclear ones. So it's helpful to kind of talk about change and being prepared for change, and that we all sort of probably feel the same way about it, but how you can kind of use it as an opportunity is really important.
Yeah, I love that. I love the thought that you just shared. It really doesn't matter how long you are in your role. Like if the way that you respond to change can definitely impact you in a positive or negative way. So my question for you then is like, why do you think in your experience people really struggle with change, or why is it resisted so much?
Mhm. I think, and like, kind of like I mentioned before, it brings uncertainty. It introduces uncertainty, and that challenges our sense of control. In the workplace, a lot of us build confidence by becoming good at what we do. So we understand the expectations, we know how to deliver, we've built a rhythm. So change can disrupt that, and it can make even the most very capable people feel like they're back in a learning curve, and that the rules that they've really grown to be successful under are now shifting. I think a lot of times we tie identity to our roles too. I know I've done that. So when something changes, maybe it's like leadership structure or the priorities of the team or the organization, or maybe there's a new organization taking over. It can, that has nothing to do with me. Like those business decisions were made way outside of my little world, right? But it feels personal. And I don't know, even when it's not intended that way. So I think resistance oftentimes comes from, it's not really about being unwilling. It's more about just trying to regain your footing in an environment that is like suddenly less predictable. I knew when I went to work one day, I knew what to expect. Well, suddenly this big news comes out and it's like, I don't even know what to expect anymore, you know? So I think that's oftentimes why people resist it, because it's the unknown, you know?
Yes. Okay, I feel like we can't move on until we talk through the personal thing because I totally agree with you. It's so true when there are decisions made that impact you, but then you're like, wait, I didn't this impacts me so much, but I didn't get a say. Like
Mm-hmm.
no one consulted me first, you
Yeah.
know, no matter where you are in your
Mm-hmm.
leadership structure, or maybe you're not a leader at all. So, what is your advice for people when they are feeling like, man, this is so personal, or like they feel so emotional about it? How do you help someone work through that, or how do you kind of talk them down a little?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of times, and throughout my career progression, right, starting and working in teams that have shifting dynamics, or shifting with different leaders or parts of the business. I mean, there's so much change that can occur, even in your personal life, that may affect how you're showing up at work. I think, um, I don't know, it's sort of like a shift from feeling really confident to now you're starting to question. I oftentimes try to remind people that, hey, we don't have all the information. And coming from someone who maybe wasn't part of those big decisions, who's now progressed into a leadership position that does have to make some really big decisions, I try to consider everyone, but I can't go ask every individual, okay, although I love a consensus, I can't gather that from everyone. So I try to remind people, you might be feeling emotional about this, but it's definitely not a personal decision. And oftentimes we feel it because we're operating within our world and the information that we have, but oftentimes there's a lot more information at play. And so it can be sort of uh, just reframing it from being like a personal issue to now it's more of a broader impact. So I don't know if that's a good answer to the question, but
No, no, that is so helpful. So when you tell me a little bit about your experience when you've worked maybe with some senior leaders who have struggled with this as well, with struggled with change, or maybe there's been experiences that you've had with them. They tell us what
yeah.
it's like even on their side of things when they're feeling the high emotion, but they're or let me rephrase this question. When someone is experiencing change and they're able to work through it, help us understand what's the difference that's going on in their mind in comparison to someone who's experiencing change and is not handling it well.
Hmm. I think oftentimes when I think about like you mentioned like executive leaders, or I even would say like high performers, they tend to feel high emotions during transitions because they really care deeply about doing a good job and maintaining a certain standard. I think oftentimes when it comes to emotional sort of impact or mental impact, it can show up as stress and frustration. Even people seem disengaged. And I don't think it's because they don't care. I think it's just they're trying to process what's happening, and they don't, again, like maybe have all the information. What I've seen as a successful sort of way to pivot through it is to when people sort of understand it, at least understand that this is affecting me emotionally, and then try to move forward that way, versus those who kind of want to sink back in and really hold on to what they know, So I think if there's resistance, it's important to recognize that and then decide, am I going to, really hold firm in this, or am I going to embrace this change and try to make an opportunity out of it? It's normal for everyone to feel disrupted or concerned, but I think it's just, again, like trying to reframe it in a way that is like, this is not a personal attack. This is actually maybe a good opportunity for me to progress or to learn more and grow, because we know that's where all the magic happens, is when you're uncomfortable. So I think when I see people that are more willing to kind of move past that, they tend to be more successful and have better outcomes with change.
Yes, I totally agree. I wonder, do you have an experience that you can share with us of what you've experienced in either you experiencing change or helping someone work through it?
Oh man, I'm thinking back on I think I've, in my career, in my adulthood, have experienced a lot of change. So when I was going into college, I actually started my professional career in like the hairstyle industry. So I did all of that. I did that for almost a decade while I was going to college. And then I finally was getting ready to graduate. My brothers teased me because I went to college for 8 years, but I'm not a doctor. I just had a hard time figuring out what I wanted to do. But making that leap into the HR world, because that's what I always wanted to do, was a big change. But when I was kind of thinking about this topic today, and I remember thinking about having to change. Even in that world, I was my own boss, I handled all the stuff, but I think about the clients that I had from day one. They didn't have the same hairstyle, for those 9 years. I had to change and adapt. And all those changes were little by little, like sort of steps. And then I was really grown and accustomed to making those changes, then pivot into now my last, 15 or so years in the HR world, or in the, I guess, the organizational world, or the, what do you call it? The corporate world.
Yeah.
It was a big leap, and I was terrified. But then when you look back and you think, every day or every week or every month or every quarter, I'm sort of making incremental change that's helping me grow. So what's a big change? And then when you think about it, if you stay the same, you're never going to progress. So having big changes in the corporate world, yes, it happens all the time. I remember in my years at Market Star, we had some huge changes over that time period. And then it was sort of just facing it with and I would help support a lot of leaders and a lot of employees who were just really uncomfortable with this idea that there was uncertainty, that they didn't know. And most of the times not most of the time, but a lot of times it's people who were like, I've been here a long time and I've done it this way, a certain way, a long time, or I've had this manager or been on this team. And what you find is that if you're willing to sort of step outside that and take on something new, learn something different, you'll really amaze yourself at the things that you can do. And then coming into this new organization, again, making that big shift to go from somewhere I'd been for, 7 years, I was very comfortable. I knew a lot, I kind of felt really good about what I was doing. And I was like, it's time for a change, totally into a whole new environment. And then a couple of years in, My CEO decides to retire. We have a brand new CEO, and she's incredible. But it's one of those things that's like, I've just looked back and thought, change. If I ever look back at a year that didn't change, like that would be crazy, So I think it's just embracing it, that we have to be prepared for it. And when I see people that are willing to sort of step into that and embrace that, it's remarkable to see the growth that comes from that.
I think that's a good point, Jess, because what I've noticed in my career is the leaders are actually looking for the people who are willing to adapt. And when there's a big change that rolls out, they are very aware and almost have a heightened awareness of who is being flexible, who's getting on board, who's becoming a cheerleader of it and a positive influence with the change with their peers, and who is not. And those are big moments. Well, I've learned, at least, those are big moments to stand up and be a leader, even if you're not truly a leader or a manager or director in your company. But I guess, like what you said, regardless, I mean, even if you are a senior leader and you're not getting on board to the change and being a positive influence, you stand out, and they're looking for those people both on both sides. So, a question that I had for you is, how can we recognize it in ourselves? Because I think sometimes when we experience change, we recognize that we are not being supportive because people have to come to us and tell us, which I think when someone is coming to you and saying, hey, we've rolled out a change, we know it's uncomfortable. We can tell you've been having a hard time with it, but we need more from you. It's almost too late, right? Yeah. Like the sentiment that you have shared has been obviously very vocal. If people have come to you, be pulling those others around you to also not be supportive of the change. So if I am someone who's experiencing change right now, and I feel like it's a personal thing, or I feel resistant to go with what is happening, how can I recognize it in myself before my leadership comes to me?
That's a good question. I think that I would say you will recognize it when you start to. It usually shows up in ways of like stress or frustration or anger, and I think it's normal at the onset of change, or like the notification of change is coming, for people to react in a way that is maybe a place of fear or concern. What does this mean for me? I think it's a normal feeling to have, but I think if you're staying in that and you're not thinking about, okay, what are my next steps? How can I, support this change? Even if you don't agree with it fully, you might just want to ask questions, because most of the time you might not, have all the information. So I think a way to recognize it within yourself is important to kind of ask yourself, am I feeling, fear, uncertainty? Is this something that I can work through, or is this something that is really challenging my values? Oftentimes, if it gets into that realm, maybe it is time to, make a change. But ultimately, when we talk about these organizational changes, or, things that happen at work, it's more so about trying to figure out, okay, what are my next steps to help me progress? In terms of noticing it within yourself, like I said, it's okay to feel those feelings initially, but if you're unable to move past them, and they're really lingering for, I would say, more than a few days or weeks, or you're being really resistant to new things that are coming through, you're feeling really threatened, like your sense of identity, or maybe your ability to perform is threatened, then I would question, if you're kind of feeling stuck. And then I would find someone you trust to speak to. If you really have a really great manager that's, supportive, sometimes we see this in groups, so it can be really harmful to sit and like you know, bounce, you know, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Oz principle, but it's a book we had to read back in my earlier days, and it's something that stuck with me. They talk about being below the line, and they say, which is like kind of being negative. You
Yeah.
you can go below the line, absolutely. We all do. You just can't stay there. So I think what's finding, if you go below the line and someone's not pulling you out, you're talking to someone who's pulling you down, that might not be the best outlet or the best resource to discuss with, and just try to really look inward and see, you know, how can I sort of make this an opportunity for myself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Well, maybe we can dig into that just a little bit more. So help us understand staying below the line. How does that impact our career and our career progression and the goals that we've set? What have you recognized with people that you've worked with?
You know, what I've recognized with that is they tend to stay where they are. And oftentimes when we don't progress, we think we're staying where we are, but you're actually falling behind because everyone is moving beyond where you were, and you're not only, you know, there, you're kind of behind. I think people recognize that, and I know for sure I've seen it kind of manifest as like an HR professional with people who are really resistant to change or some sort of initiative. It's sort of, you know, they're seen as someone who's not willing to progress, not willing to innovate, and they sort of get I wouldn't say overlooked, but maybe they're not considered as highly considered for a person, like a new opportunity or something like that. I think people will, you know, we have our detractors or our cheerleaders, you know, and if you're known as someone who's kind of always below the line, always finding the negative, always criticizing, you know, decisions that are made by leadership or whoever, then you're generally going to be not sought after for your opinions or your thoughts. You know, people are going to overlook your point of view because they're going to say, oh, they're just always negative. They're always finding the negative or criticizing everything. I don't need that right now, you know? So they're just going to, and then it just creates this, you know, it's like it just gets worse and worse because you're sort of like spiraling into this, you know, negativity, and everyone's just kind of like, I don't need that right now. You know, not everyone, there's some people that might, you know, feed into it, but ultimately I always say that, you know, we come to work to get, they pay you to come here, you know, it's not like your free time. So let's make it the best it can be. And if you find someone that's kind of bringing you down under the line, or, you know, negativity about these changes or things like that, I think it's important to try to avoid that and try to stay on the positive, or at least focus on what you can control. I think that's the biggest piece of advice is, you know, focusing on what you can control with this change that's occurring and not really what you can't, and trying to kind of have a positive outlook with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, sometimes, you know, when I think back on my career, there's probably been times where I've struggled with some change that I've experienced. And one thing that really helped me, which is something that we offer here at HiER, is sometimes you just need an outside party, someone who's not really invested in you personally. They don't know your personal life. They're not invested in your work. You can find a coach or a mentor that you can just ask for honest advice on, and someone that can be real with you, that you can feel willing to hear their feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And that sometimes, at least for me, is what has helped kick me out of that mindset and be like, okay, maybe it is me, you know, maybe it's not the other 500 people I work with that is like on board with this change. Maybe in the end, it is me. So yeah. And I think too, Jess, what you mentioned earlier is so interesting. Like when we have a big change rolled out in our role or at our company, it feels so shocking. It feels like jarring. But if we all just sat and thought about the little changes we experienced over the last month or the last quarter or the last year, we would realize, oh, wait, we really do experience change a lot. This isn't that different than what we've had over the past, you know, 9 weeks or so. And it's interesting how a mindset can be all the difference maker for someone when it comes to change.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'd love to talk more about trust and building trust in uncertain times. And I know this is something that we put in the title of trust and trusting even yourself, which I think is so interesting, and I'm excited to dive into it. But tell us a little bit, what does self-trust actually mean in a professional setting?
Yeah. I think in a professional setting, or really just I'm learning this with my kids because they're like growing up, and I'm trying to teach them how to trust in themselves and make good decisions. But I think it's less about being confident and more about believing that you can handle what comes next. So even if you don't have all the answers yet, it's about trusting your ability to think through situations, to learn quickly, adapt, and make decisions with the information that you have. It doesn't mean that you never feel uncertain or that you don't have questions. It just means that that feeling of uncertainty doesn't stop you from moving forward. So what I've seen in my career over time is that people that often think that like you have to have that self-trust, it comes from experience alone, but it's really, I think it actually it's built through action. So by navigating situations where you maybe didn't feel fully ready and realizing after that you figured it out. That's been huge for me. As a person who came into, HR, I'm super conflict avoidant. If you know me in my personal life, I am so easy go with the flow. Like, if there's an issue, I'm just like, I'm out, but in the HR world, sometimes you have to have really difficult conversations. And that was a really huge thing to overcome. I would question my career choices every time. I was like, why did I do this? But then I look back and I think, or any hard thing, like any hard decision, where you have to do something difficult. I always, when you're facing that, I work with people, coach with people all the time to say, think about when you've had to do something hard and look back and think, I do this all the time. I'm like, I've had to do really hard things. And I look back and I survived it and I figured it out. And maybe I didn't know the answers, but I figured it out. And that has helped to build my kind of self-trust. So even in small ways, if you're speaking up without maybe your idea isn't fully formed yet, or taking on something new that you haven't done before, or maybe making a decision that you are scared to make, but a simple way is just to think, instead of thinking, am I ready for this? I'm experienced, I can do this. Maybe you just have to think, can I figure this out? Because that's sort of what I look back on, is like, I figured this out before. And that, most of the time the answer is yes to the second question. And that's, I think, how you really start to build that self-trust over time.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely takes a lot of practice. And I think too, if you are someone that has had a lot of practice, whether you've wanted it or not, in this area of building self-trust, I just think back, Jess, on the times that I came to you for, like, I didn't have self-trust, but I needed it. And you helped create that in me. There were some really hard moments early on when I was very first a manager. And there were some terminations I had to do. There was some offboarding I had to do. It was my first time. I was so nervous. And I just remember you walking me through it so well. And you helped to build that in me. And so I just think if you're someone too that has had a lot of experience with that, pass that on and help build it in others, because it has been, I just remember those moments were so impactful. So thank you, Jess. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm glad I could help. Yeah.
So I'm just looking through. I want to make sure that we get the most of our time. So help me understand what, from that, like from the experience that I've had with you, what advice do you give to others who come to you and like they are in a moment where they don't really trust themselves, or they're feeling really unsure of their ability to accomplish something? Are there any specific tactics that you share with them that you didn't just share with us, that you help coach them through that?
Yeah. I mean, I think in depending on the context, like in that context, when we're facing something difficult that maybe I've had more experience in, like these difficult conversations or hard decisions, when it comes to decision making, I always I tend to find that we, especially as if you're in a leadership position where you're making decisions, really anyone, we tend to want to make a decision before we have all the information. I find that as sort of a quick jump. I can't tell you, and I don't want to get too specific, but I will, how many times I've had managers come and say, I need to let so-and-so go because they did X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, what did they say? You know, did they say why they did that? Well, I haven't talked to them yet. And I'm like, wait a minute, you know, we don't have all the, a huge part of the information here. And so I think they're nervous because they're acting off the information they have, but there's still some uncertainty out there. And they don't want to open up that door of like, maybe something will happen. Maybe it'll reveal something that will change the decision and the outcome that I've made. But I always kind of flip it like, yeah, maybe it will, you know, that let's make the right decision. So when it comes to decision making, I always want to try to remind people that like, hey, make sure we have all the information, or maybe we make a decision because there's a change happening that we don't like, and we want to make a split decision, and we say, wait, maybe there's more to it that you might feel better about this. Inversely, you know, when it comes to actually facing a difficult, you know, situation, if I've been with it, and I'll usually say, you know, here's what I don't like to say, here's what I would do, but I would say, okay, what do you want to do? First of all, I let them kind of give their 2 cents. And I don't ever say, this is what you need to do. Because just like with my kids, I want to say, like, okay, you need to do this, 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 and do it this way. But I realize that they're never going to be able to build confidence if they don't, you know, come up with it on their own. Try it, see what works, you know. And in terms of, you know, different tactics or different opportunities to build that, of course, making a termination decision is not so flippant, right? But it's definitely, there's other areas where maybe it's sharing something in a meeting or whatever. I usually will encourage people to think through. I'll sometimes say, let's play this out. We did a lot of role playing at the sales organization I worked before, but it depends on the person if they're into that. But really, I would just say, okay, let's play this through. Okay, if this happens, we just try to, I think people feel a lot of uncertainty and concern, emotional stress, because it's unpredictable. They don't know what to expect, or we tend to prepare for the worst. And so we're really setting ourselves up for the worst case scenario, when oftentimes you find that like, oh, okay, that was definitely, like, you want to ask your manager for a raise. It's very nerve-wracking and scary. And you, in your mind, you think they're going to flip the desk and be like, what's wrong with you? You know, but really, sometimes they're like, you know what? Yeah, I've been working on this approval for, you know, you deserve it. Or they'll give you more than you expected. And you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think of that, you know? So I think it's important to remember that what you in your mind can kind of trick you into thinking it's worse than it often is, because it's a survival tactic, but really reframe it in a way to think that like, this could be an opportunity. This could be something better, better than what my brain is tricking me to think it is, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And the opportunity thing is like, that's real, especially with change. You know, if there's a change in your organization or a change to your company, seeing it as an opportunity more than a threat is so important. So can you share with us some examples of growth that really only happen through change?
Well, I think like in my experience, and kind of going back to that as a leader or working alongside leaders that are, you know, preparing this change to roll out, it's never lost on them, the people that are willing to kind of raise their hand and take on more or learn more, or that are going to be a cheerleader. Well, cheerleader is not the best term, but you know what I mean, like a positive force. And so I think it's important to sort of try to be, you know, try to adopt those sort of characteristics, because you will be recognized and noticed. So when it comes to making change, obviously, or growth, we talk about, there's so many, you know, self-help books that talk about, you know, change happening, or growth happening when you're uncomfortable. And we know change is uncomfortable. So I think stepping into that and embracing that, I've seen the most growth for people who, at least in the workplace, are willing to try something new, put themselves out there, take on maybe, and it doesn't have to be a whole new role. It can just be helping out with a different project, or, sharing perspectives in meetings or things like that, that are just showing that, hey, I'm pushing this forward. So I think in terms of my own experience, I've been like a go-to person to have all the answers. I've been the one that's like, you can always count on Jess, to come through. And that's great. But if you just stay there, you're never going to, move past where you're at, So if you want to stay there, that's fine. Over time, you'll have to experience some discomfort in order to really grow beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. I also have been told from a mentor that it really doesn't take a lot to stand out anymore these days. And if you think about going above and beyond, I think 10, 15 years ago was like really above and beyond in your role. Took a lot of effort. I think now it's easier than ever, at least from my experience, to really stand out. Going above and beyond doesn't mean anymore staying until 9 p.m. at night and putting in long hours. I think it's really small strategic ways that you can stand out if you're really smart about it. And being adaptable to change is a really easy, small way to stand out to your leadership and show them that you are ready for whatever next step in your career that you've been working for, that you've been talking to them about, or whatever it might be.
Yeah,
Would you agree with that?
It's huge. Yeah, I think especially as I've progressed in sort of my career from being a person who now makes a lot of decisions. You and I work with leaders that they recognize that, and I think you're right. That 20 years ago, I think even like pre-COVID, right, there was this idea that the first one there and the last one to leave was, the high performer, the person who really we couldn't live without, Debbie. But really, it's about who's moving the needle, who's actually adaptable. That's such a huge characteristic, or I guess a competency now that people are really seeking. And I think it's something that you sort of have to learn and have this confidence in yourself that you can handle hard things that come. But when you think about who you want, working on your team, or who you want, as a leader yourself, it's those types of characteristics. I want somebody who is willing to adapt or be flexible with me, or, help me think creatively about how to work. So all of those, I think, resilience, especially if you think about, I hate to like refer to the dark times, but it really changed how we work.
Yes.
And it really did reveal the importance of being adaptable and willing to, expand what you're doing, and really willing to just think differently and do more, like you said, strategically. Not more in the sense that you need to work longer hours. It's just more about what's really creating impact and what's maybe not,
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. One thing that I have tried to do in my career, but I can't say that I've always been perfect at it. It's definitely a work in progress. But when there's been change rolled out that I don't necessarily, agree with right away, or my first initial reaction is to be like, why? Or no, or why are we doing that? Sometimes I'll just stay quiet about it and not say anything until I can sit on it for some time. Like I'll give it a night and think about it. And the next morning, when I've been able to maybe talk out loud at home, or, work through some things in my own mind, I'll put some questions together for my leadership. But I think those moments can be so important. And if you come off sometimes being the negative one, or the person that's unsupportive, it could be pretty long-term impactful negatively on your ability to be thought of, as for a next opportunity.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think about it, it just people view work, everyone views work sort of in their own way, right? I mean, we spend a lot of time working. It's like I said before, a lot of times tied to our identity. When I see people, reacting to change, I expect that most people are not going to see it as an opportunity right away. And that's okay. It's sort of the shift will start to happen when we really interpret what's happening. So our first instinct is always like, what could go wrong? Or what does this mean for me? But I find it helpful to reframe it as like, what could this make possible instead of what could go wrong? Like, what are the possibilities now with this new, change? So you're not ignoring the challenges, but it's like you're kind of expanding your perspective beyond that immediate discomfort, which you're allowed to have for sure. I think we all do. But in my experience, like what I've seen is that change can create access to like new visibility, new responsibilities, maybe some new relationships or new ways of thinking that those are really opportunities that you don't want to miss if you're only focused on kind of preserving what you had before. So I think it's not really like I'm trying to force positivity. It sounds like as a leader, like don't don't speak up, go with it, and you'll reap the rewards. Not necessarily. It's about training yourself to kind of identify the possibilities that are there, and instead of, and there is risk, but it's not all risk. There is possibility. And I think about it even in my personal life, right? If I make a change in my home or whatever, and everyone's bucking against me, it's like, man, this is really exhausting. And maybe it was a bad, poor choice, but even then, it's like there's opportunities to then make a change, right? Like there's always change is constant. Nothing. I have a colleague that I really respect that always tells me, she reminds me, nothing's permanent, Jess, nothing's permanent. So that's true. When things are hard, it might be challenging, but it's not, it will change, it will get better.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Nothing's permanent.
Mhm.
And a lot can change in a day. I mean, they could roll the change
Yeah.
out today and then tomorrow be
Oh
like,
God.
"Oh,
Yeah.
look at
I've had
you."
that where I'm like, we're doing this. And then I'm like, oh, okay, we're going to do this instead, like, and
Yeah.
it happens, but I think you have to roll with it and just know that, there is opportunity, there's possibility here. And that's really the best way to kind of reframe it in a way that is positive for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jess, I know that you've shared a lot, but I'm wondering if you can share 2 to 3 practical tools or habits that people can use when navigating change, just some tools we can put in our tool belt.
Yeah, I think I kind of mentioned this before, but I think one of the most helpful tools that I can think of is to like control what you can and define what you don't control. So always focus on what you can control. And that's when I have people that are really, frustrated or upset, I always say, okay, what can you control? You can control, how you perceive it. So when things are changing, it's really common to get stuck in like what's unclear, but kind of separate what's within your control, like how you communicate, your effort, how you show up, your willingness to learn. Those are all things you can control, and that helps you kind of have some immediate focus and reduces kind of that feeling of overwhelm or uncertainty. I think another habit is to kind of shorten your decision window. So when we're uncertain, we tend to overanalyze. Like I said, we're going to worst case scenario. This is going to be horrible. But give yourself a time frame to kind of make a decision and then commit to it. So that'll kind of keep you moving forward instead of getting stuck in this like, loop of either uncertainty, indecision, or just like worst case. And then I think it's also important to kind of check in with yourself at the end of the week, maybe take 5 minutes or so to think, okay, what did I navigate? I'm a big proponent of like, keeping a list of things that you've done, because we tend to forget about things, but it's good to check in with yourself and remember, what did I learn? It sounds kind of simple or maybe cheesy to some, but it does help to reinforce the progress you've made and build confidence in real time, instead of waiting until you've got it all figured out. You're sort of still in this uncertain phase, and you're checking in and kind of figuring out, how you're stepping through it.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Jess. Those are great tools. Those are great tools. And don't worry, if you didn't have a pen, we'll be sending those tools out. So follow us on social media because you'll be seeing them. Well, I want to open up some questions to the audience. We don't always get this type of like mentorship in our career all the time. And so if there's any questions that you all have for Jess or some advice that you're looking for, the floor is yours. And don't worry if no one
I
has.
have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
My company has recently has bought themselves out from our old headquarters. So we were acquired by ourselves, I guess. So the ability we went from being a big global company to now almost a little startup company, and like the ability to move into new roles has gone down significantly. And I'm still trying to like ask for new work and see what I can do. Do you have any suggestions on how to become more I'm trying to think of the word. I'm thinking flexible, but more fluid into the company's needs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's a like a hard transition. So one of the biggest things a company can do is like totally, an acquisition or divestiture or whatever that is, I think. So I know you're going through it. I think you're already thinking about it the right way, right? To think that, hey, I want to be part of the change instead of part of the resistance, So I think it's important to continue with that mindset. I would, like I said before, it doesn't have to be a huge leap. It's not like, hey, I want to do this whole new thing, but it can be, incremental changes that you're just showing. I would be vocal about it with your leadership. Hey, really excited about this change. I really want to help push things forward. I really want to be, see some opportunities and growth from this, and thinking about it on a broader scale of what it can do for your team or the organization as a whole. If you're showing that, hey, this isn't, I'm on board, I'm really excited. I want to see what we can do. And I have, high hopes, and here's how I can contribute in whatever ways you can. I think it's a great start. And then when you're taking on these, projects, just trying to be positive about it and share what sort of impact that's creating. Ask questions about, what the direction of the company is, or if that's really clearly communicated, because oftentimes it's not. If it's really clearly communicated, then you can figure out what you can align to in those goals, and just trying to stay aligned, focused, and positive. I think with these big changes, organizations expect their employees to be like, whoa, especially when you're losing out on advancement opportunities. That's a huge, that really is a hard shift to focus on when you're thinking about your career. If you had an idea that, hey, I have all this upward mobility and now that's changed, I think it's important to recognize, like, what can I do to make an impact within this, this organization that I'm a part of, and maybe try to find a pathway. It might not be what you thought it was before, but maybe there's another avenue based on sort of some of the steps you've taken and things you've learned that will help position you maybe differently, but also in a way that creates growth for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Great question. Big change.
Big change. Yeah.
Absolutely. We have a little bit more time.
Well, that's exciting because there's probably a lot of visibility with that, so I think it's just honestly, like Tanya mentioned, like just having a positive attitude, being willing to take on more, not in the sense that like you're overworked, but in the sense that like, hey, I'm willing to branch out. But I think that's a great opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
So I have a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So in my current role, there's like our motto is pivot, right? There's just always changes happening, right? And we're kind of starting off a new program, right? And so we're learning all these new different processes and things. And I guess when you have lots of changes, how do you keep your team motivated and like hold that accountability when everyone's just like trying to keep up, right?
Mm-hmm. That is a great question. And I will say, and I've been in my career, like I said, I've experienced a lot of change. Change fatigue is a real thing. We definitely can get just tired of all the change. So if the motto is pivot, I feel you, that is painful. There's a lot of change. So, and like I said, it with change brings a lot of uncertainty. And when there's a lot of uncertainty or ambiguity in your day-to-day can be really challenging. So having to motivate a team, like I said, or like you said, is a huge challenge. And I think I recognize that, like we talk about it a lot at my organization with all the changes we've had. Like we're tired of all these changes. People are going to get tired. I think focusing on what you can control and what they can control, highlighting what contributions they're making. It sometimes people feel like their contributions are getting overlooked because there's so much focus and emphasis on the changes that are happening. So as a leader, I think focusing on their contributions and like, hey, I see you, you're doing great work. I appreciate you pivoting, and we've got another pivot again. It's like sort of creating this environment where, hey, we're all growing through this. We're seeing opportunities. I think it's important too to call out if you've had the same people on your team. What I found helpful sometimes is to look back on their progression too and call out to them, like help them see that all this change really has contributed to their growth and success. Hopefully that's been the case. You can probably find some small nuggets like, hey, remember 2 years ago when, we were here, and now look at you now, you're doing all this, you're doing that, like you've grown so much. So I think having people see the value and actually see returns and outcomes as a result of all the change that's occurred is really useful. I know with my leader, like our new CEO, she took over 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Gosh, I know it's been so much change since then, but she does a really good job of saying, you guys are doing, like, thank you for all you've done. And I think that does, even just thank you and acknowledgement, it really does go a long way for people. So I'm sure you're doing that. But if you are, just continue and know that it does make a positive difference. And then also hearing people out. So if you have a change and you're in a pivot environment, you're probably going to get a lot of questions and grumbles and like, here we go again. It's okay to validate that, but say, guys, look, here, or guys and gals, here's what we can control. Let's move forward. What's one thing you're going to do that's going to help you get through this, and just trying to help drive that forward, even though it's hard.
I love that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jess.
Mhm.
Any other questions? Well, Jess, we are so grateful for your time and all the knowledge that you've shared with us. It has been amazing. I want to close with a question that we ask on for all people or all webinar guests that join us that are willing to share. So the question that I always ask is, what is your greatest advice for the next generation of professional women?
Oh, this is a great question. And I wish I would have heard this back, 15 years ago, starting out. I think the biggest piece of advice that I would offer professional women, especially, is to not wait until you feel completely ready or fully confident to take the next step. In my experience, I think some of the most important opportunities that come before you, they come before you feel fully prepared for them. And if you wait for that feeling, you can end up holding yourself back from growth that you are actually capable of navigating. So oftentimes we see women, we want to wait until we hit 100% of all the requirements until we put ourselves out there. So I think it's important to not do that. Encourage yourself to build trust in your own judgment. You can seek input, learn from others, but don't kind of lose your voice, and think for yourself, make decisions, even when things aren't perfectly clear and not perfectly laid out. So I think my biggest advice would be to, just get out there, take steps, feel, like you can do it. You think you might not be able to, but again, with this, it's a big change. There's uncertainty, but you have to take those steps to step through it. Don't underestimate how much, you can actually achieve without, checking all the boxes.
Yeah, I love that. Bet on yourself.
Yeah, you don't have to have it all figured out. You have to just be willing to deal with what's in front of you and trust that you will keep figuring it out as you go. Because really, that's all we're all just figuring it out, right?
I was going to say, if there's anything that I've learned as I've grown in my career and moved up the ladder a little bit, it's that's what everyone's doing.
Uh-huh.
We're all trying to figure out. I call it winning ugly. We're all winning ugly.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
It's beautiful from the outside, but if you were in it and you were part of it, you'd be like, man, this is kind of messy, just as messy as I am. So that is awesome advice. Thanks, Jess. Well, for everyone that's joining or listening in, this is being recorded. It's going to be added into the dashboard for all of our Rise HiER members. And so if you're a Rise HiER member, a core member, you're going to have access to all of our webinars in the past and in the future, as well as all of our group coaching sessions that we do with our members. There's lots of education out there, lots of great advice, and a lot of help, because managing and working through and navigating a career can be difficult and can be challenging at times. And sometimes you need help, and sometimes you feel like you got it all together. And Rise HiER is here for both, for everything in between. So thanks everyone for joining. Jess, you're amazing. Thank you so much. I hope everyone has a beautiful Friday and a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.